19, after clause 131, Baroness Noakes.
My Lords, it is very late at night. My Lords, the murders of Sarah Everard, Bieber Henry and Nicole Smallman early this year shocked the entire country, and rightly so. Yet we know these cases are not an exception. In the 7 months after Sarah Everard's death, another 81 women were killed, countless more subjected to sexual violence, abuse and harassment. We often hear from the police repeatedly that women don't come forward to report crimes, yet the evidence shows they are right to be concerned that the violence and abuse they face often does not result in criminal sanction. A UN Women UK survey in January 2021 showed 80% of women of all ages said they had experienced sexual harassment in public spaces. 96% of respondents did not report them, with 45% saying it would not change anything. In March this year, Hope Not Hate published figures showing 85,000 women are raped each year, but only 1.4% of rape cases in England and Wales, which had been recorded by the police, ended with the suspect being charged. This is the lowest figure ever recorded. We know more than 2 million crimes against women went unreported since 2018 from the Office of National Statistics. My Lords, today I am proposing Amendment 219 so we can learn from police best practice in tackling this epidemic of violence and restoring confidence in the police that they get the seriousness and scale of the problem. In 2016, Nottinghamshire Police, under the leadership of Sue Fish, became the first police force in the country where women and girls could report cases of abuse and harassment and have it treated as what it is, a hate crime. Now, over 11 police forces follow this approach, including North Yorkshire, Somerset and Avon and Northamptonshire. My Lords, I want to take on some of the myths. Firstly, Amendment 219 does not create any new offences. It's about recognising the causes of existing offences and how serious this is for society. Secondly, this is not about catcalling. Street harassment is already illegal. We rightly don't accept casual racism in our streets. Why should we accept those who try to intimidate or exercise power over women by screaming abuse at them? But talking about this as being about wolf whistling minimises the experiences women have. In Nottingham, women came forward to report stalking, groping, indecent assault and kidnapping, knowing police would take these matters seriously and see how women have been targeted. Independent research showed this improved victims' confidence to come forward and change the culture in the police towards understanding the causes of violence against women. Reporting crimes increased by a quarter, giving police crucial information they need to identify repeat offenders. We know many offenders graduate from apparently minor offences, such as harassment, to more serious ones. This policy helps the detection and prevention of these crimes by repeat offenders. Thirdly, this is not just about data. It is about how we treat violence against women and girls. We rightly recognise that crimes motivated by racism or homophobia are especially serious, and those who commit them should face harsher sentences. When we do not then extend equal treatment to those who target women simply for who they are, it is little wonder many women do not feel the police take the violence and abuse they face seriously. The government agreed earlier this year to ensure all police forces do this, and we await implementation. Yet, as the hate crime coordinator in North Yorkshire told us, without the courts following this up through their sentencing, the impact of this policy is limited. My Lords, Amendment 219 would ensure that our courts reflect this hostility in determining the sentence someone receives. It uses the same logic as other forms of hate crime, such as religion, race or sexual orientation. It inserts sex or gender into Section 66 of the Sentencing Act. I know some colleagues will ask about this wording. Firstly, it ensures crimes motivated by hatred towards either men or women for being men or women would be recognised as such. But make no mistake, the evidence shows women are overwhelmingly the victims. In Nottinghamshire and Avon and Somerset, 90% of victims reporting were women. In Devon, 80%. Secondly, this means our focus is on the perpetrator and not on the victim. Currently, the CPS says a hate crime is any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice. Perception matters in hate crime, whether someone is born a woman or becomes one, if they are targeted for being a woman by someone. Being able to record that motivation will help tackle the cause and find those responsible for the harm. To try to exclude some women from this or set out a different criterion for this particular type of hate crime is to give perpetrators a free pass. It risks valuable information about offending patterns to be missed, and potentially gives perpetrators a chance to further demean a victim by claiming they can't experience misogyny because they are trans. Already we recognise someone can be a victim of more than one type of hate crime, except if that part of their identity being targeted is being a woman. This is about respecting the victim and how they feel they have been targeted, rather than demanding they fit a specific tick box. Muslim women may be victims of hate crime because they are Muslim and because they are women. 42% of black and ethnic minority women aged 14 to 21 report experiencing unwanted sexual attraction and attention at least once a month. Many women and girls with intellectual disabilities also experience abuse for the dual reasons of their disabilities and sex or gender. The government has previously defined gender as part of the Gender Recognition Act reform consultation. And again, as the CPS note, there is no legal definition of hostility, so we use the everyday understanding of the word. With any hate crimes, my lords, the police and CPS gather evidence and present it to the courts to decide if it meets their everyday understanding. This amendment would require them to present evidence about the perpetrator, because what matters here is holding them to account and not debating the status of the victim. My lords, not to be too presumptuous for when my noble friend the Minister responds, she may say that she will wait until the Law Commission review of hate crime is completed. This is why this is more of a probing amendment. A review which has been going since 2018 and in its draft recommendations has supported this proposal. Should they publish the final report, we can be informed by their work at report stage. But if they don't, this amendment means we won't lose the opportunity this bill offers to help tackle violence against women. Indeed, a Law Commission review is no guarantee of action being taken. Since 2010, more than half of their reviews have never made it onto the statute book, with many of them never even receiving a response from governments. This includes the 2014 review of hate crime legislation, which is still awaiting a ministerial response. Even if this review is published shortly as promised, we may have to wait a year for the government response, which could then require further consultation. Then we will have to wait for another legislative opportunity that will be given parliamentary time and for a new bill to go through its various stages. My lords, women have been waiting my whole lifetime for action to be taken on these matters. There have already been 3 million crimes more against women since the Law Commission were asked to review the law in this area. Every year we delay closing this gap in our hate crime laws. I understand why more women question whether the government is serious about keeping them safe. The evidence shows this policy isn't a silver bullet to the problems with policing and courts, but it's a progress and best practice. The time for waiting is over. Now is the time for doing. Women and girls of this country deserve nothing less. I beg to move.
Hear, hear.
Amendment proposed after clause 131. Insert the new clause as printed on the marshalled list.
My Lords, I'm pleased to join my noble friend Baroness Noakes and the noble Lords Ponsonby and Russell in proposing this simple but effective amendment. This amendment ensures individual protection against hostile aggravations and offences based on sex or gender. The noble Lord, the former Lord Chief Justice, Lord Judge, explained that to add sex or gender to the list is consistent with the statutory provisions in the Equalities Act. If we are to have a statutory list, sex and gender should be expressly included. He voiced his surprise that the legislation omitted this category of potential victims. It's clear that this amendment plugs a gap in the law and ensures that all people subject to harassment or violent assault will be better protected. As Robin Moira White, a barrister at Old Square Chambers, suggested, if this amendment is not accepted, all those who are subject to these abuses will continue to remain at risk. Quite plainly, this amendment is a catch-all clause. It's designed to protect everyone. And to quote a letter kindly written to me from Baroness Hunt of Bethnal Green, this amendment provides comprehensive coverage for all women. This is about Sarah Everard and many nameless others. A slew, my lords, of tragic events, most recently the brutal murders of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, continues to strike fear into young women who just want to get home safely. It's our duty to ensure that these protections, and we can help by including sex and gender in this bill. It should be a given right that every individual can arrive home safely after a day at work or simply meeting friends at the pub. This amendment is just one way that we can begin to ensuring that everyone, regardless of their sex or gender, are protected. It's our duty to ensure that what happened to Sarah, Sabina and countless others does not happen again. And I am certain that this amendment may go some way to achieving that important aim.
I also rise, I put my name to this amendment, and I rise in support of Baroness Noakes' typically eloquent statement. I will not say that I rise to say something briefly, since earlier on today, almost every noble lord who said that went on to speak at length. So I will simply say I rise to speak to this amendment. And this amendment is essentially a continuation of a discussion which the noble lady of the Minister will remember extremely well from springtime when we were talking about the Domestic Abuse Bill, and in particular about misogyny. And, my lords, that was probably the first time in this House that we'd ever really had discussions about misogyny. My lords, 8 months is a very, very long time when it comes to domestic abuse, and I think now every noble lord is aware of misogyny and is aware of just how pervasive it is. So, to some extent, those 8 months, I think, have helped the case for an amendment like this. On the 17th of March, the Minister announced, as Lady Noakes mentioned, that the Home Office will require all police forces in England and Wales to start recording crimes, primarily against women, that they regard as being misogynistic in intent. And we were told that this would happen by autumn. I checked on a search engine when autumn officially ends, and much to my surprise, it actually ends on the 21st of December, which does seem rather late. So the government does have a little bit more time to actually deliver. But I would ask the noble lady to, and if she can't tell us this evening, would she please come back to us and give us some guidance on exactly when the guidance that is going to be given to police forces to collect this data on a systematic and consistent data, which is the most important thing, when is that going to be available? I communicated this morning with a very, very senior police officer, a lady who is on the National Council of Police Chiefs, and asked her if she knew when it was coming, and she said she didn't know when it was coming, but she basically said, please get a move on. We are all dying for this to arrive. Her own police force, which is one of the largest in the country, has systematically rolled out domestic abuse training for the vast majority of its officers, which has been extremely well received. So they're absolutely primed to receive this guidance as and when it arrives. So please, can we get a move on, and please, can we have a commitment either at the dispatch box later or in writing exactly when we can expect this? Because if this very senior police officer didn't know, I certainly hope the noble lady, the Minister, knows. This amendment has the virtue, above all, of brevity and great simplicity. And it will probably not surprise noble lords that the person who is behind the brevity, which is something he is typically very much in favour of, brevity and clarity, is the noble and learned Lord Judge, who is unable to be with us this evening. I think he was hoping that brevity would mean just that when noble lords said they would be brief. Unfortunately, he was disappointed, so he can't be here. But you can assume that the thrust of this amendment and the nature of it has a great deal to do with his guidance and his input. And to use a phrase he actually used at the time we were talking about this, he said, let's just go for the jugular. So that's what this is about. As other noble lords have mentioned, the Equality Act of 2010 defined 9 different protected characteristics. And this amendment specifically would equalise sex and gender with the other key innate characteristics, sex, sexual orientation, gender reassignment, race, disability, and religion or belief. And as other noble lords have said, it is designed to protect anybody and everybody. It is totally inclusive. It is not defining people by what gender they have or they choose to have or they think they have or what they were born with. It is designed to protect everybody. Yes, of course.
Gender reassignment, but the amendment does not say gender reassignment, it says gender.
I think if you look at the amendment, it says or presumed sex or gender. That is as presumed by the perpetrator.
The point is, my lords, in arguing for it, he mentioned the protected characteristic of gender reassignment, not gender.
I think I was quoting from the Equality Act, but if I wasn't, the noble lord here says I was right. So I do think if you look at the Equality Act and you look at the protected characteristics, that is one of them. If I'm wrong, I apologise in advance, but I do think if the Lord... Sorry, yes.
Baroness Lady Faulkner, Margarine is no longer with us. Gender is not a protected characteristic under the equality legislation. Gender reassignment is.
That is exactly what the noble lord said. The noble lord said that gender reassignment is a protected characteristic under the Equalities Act, and gender is not, which is what this amendment addresses.
Thank you very much indeed. Does anybody else wants any more clarification? I'm sure other people who've read the Equality Act will come in and back me up. But a particular point that I think the noble and learned Lord Judge would have made if he was still able to be with us is he is absolutely clear that this particular amendment and change to the Sentencing Act would actually be welcomed by the judiciary themselves, who are often asked to really make quite difficult judgments, and this would make their ability to do that a great deal easier. The other thing I think is really important, the noble lady Baroness Noakes mentioned how some of the police forces around the country voluntarily started recording alleged misogynistic acts, primarily against women. And we had a briefing last week, which I attended online, where 2 of the police forces involved actually gave evidence several years on as to how effective this was. And these were the Nottinghamshire Police Force and North Yorkshire. And the thing that came out completely clearly, which they find very frustrating, is having actually amassed this information and passed it on to the Crown Prosecution Service, what these police forces are finding is that the way in which the Crown Prosecution Service deals with the information and the data that has been recorded that is given to them as additional evidence when they are considering prosecutions or are actually making prosecutions, is that the way in which it is being dealt is wholly inconsistent. It is inconsistent between different offices and different areas. And one of the virtues of this amendment is by inserting this into the Sentencing Act, it would make it crystal clear to the Crown Prosecution Service that this is information that must be part of any case that is potentially brought before the judiciary, because this is data that is required to be considered when thinking about sentencing. So, my Lords, I commend this amendment to the House. It is simple, it is unambiguous, and it protects everybody.
So my noble friend, the noble Lord sits down. The following characteristics are protected under the Equalities Act: age, something else that we don't need to worry about, gender reassignment, and sex. There are other ones as well, but those are the 3. The effect of sex being a protected characteristic, that means that you are entitled not to be discriminated against on the grounds of your sex, whether you're a man or you're a woman. That means if you are a transgender woman, you would be entitled to be protected on the grounds of sex, because you're a woman, and you would be entitled to be protected on the grounds of gender reassignment. So when you say gender is not a protected characteristic, you are entitled under the Equalities Act, as one would expect, not to be discriminated against because of your sex.
Lord Falkland-Ferreton for his lesson in equalities law. My Lords, my Amendment 219A was degrouped from 219 late last week. And while it's drafted more broadly than Amendment 219, I tabled it in order to address the very same issues covered by Amendment 219. And I therefore believe, for the convenience of the committee, that I should speak to my Amendment 219A now, and I hope that the other noble lords have added their name: Noble Baroness Lady Ludford, Noble Baroness Lady Bray Thompson, and Noble Lord Hunt of King's Heath will do so as well. And on that basis, I will not move Amendment 219A in the next group, and I hope, with all the amendments left still to be debated, that the committee will welcome this. My Amendment 219A, like Amendment 219, does have cross-party support, so the issues raised by both amendments are not party political in any sense. Indeed, I find myself in an unusual position of being on the same side of the argument as the Noble Baroness Lady Ludford, and neither she nor I ever thought that we would be in that position. My Lords, I have 2 main problems with Amendment 219, and the first is directly addressed by my Amendment 219A. Amendment 219 preempts the work of the Law Commission, which, as we've been heard, has been working on hate crime for some time now. Its consultation document runs to over 500 pages, with over 50 dedicated to sex or gender. The Law Commission has received many thousands of consultation responses, and it is now working on its final position. I believe that its work should conclude before we legislate in this area. And my Amendment 219A gives the government a regulation-making power to amend Section 66 of the Sentencing Act of 2020 in order to implement the Law Commission's recommendations. And that gives the government, if they agree with and accept the recommendations, the fastest possible implementation route. The Law Commission's final recommendations may well be controversial and therefore would not qualify for the special procedures for Law Commission bills, which we use in your Lordship's House, if primary legislation were the route that were taken. Amendment 219A therefore uses the draft affirmative procedure to enable some additional parliamentary scrutiny. My Lords, I do believe it would be wrong for Parliament to anticipate the final views of the Law Commission. There are different views on both the principle and the substance of the extensions to the hate crime laws. And noble lords would be wise to wait for the Law Commission's final recommendations rather than proceed on the basis of their provisional views. Now, specifically, in relation to the extension of hate crimes to sex, the Law Commission was clear that it believed that two of its criteria for amending the hate crime legislation, namely that of demonstrable need and additional harm, were met. But it was far less clear that its third criterion of suitability was met. And to mitigate that, its consultation includes some very significant potential carve-outs covering, for example, domestic abuse and sexual offences, so that if hate crime were extended to sex, the very crimes that I know that some noble lords are particularly concerned about might not be included in the Law Commission's final recommendations. This is not an area where there is a settled view about what should be done. My lords, my second problem with Amendment 219 is a substantive one about whether hate crime laws are extended, whether if hate crime laws are extended to sex, they should be...
Does the Baroness know when the Law Commission might produce its final report, and then what the timetable thereafter would be? For example, how long there would then be before the Minister has to respond, and how long thereafter there might be before there would be some provision in relation to it?
Noble Lord Faulkner of Thoroton.
Question. It's a question where I would have thought that piece of information was quite important to evaluate her amendment.
I will tell the Noble Lord what I know, which is that the Law Commission have said that they hope to report in final by the end of this year. It is then normal to give a period of time for the government to consider their response. And then there is a period after that for deciding on a legislative route. My amendment offers a fast way through if the government decide to accept, if the Royal Commission makes certain recommendations and the government decide to accept them. My amendment would give the government the power by regulations to amend Section 66 of the Sentencing Act to achieve those recommendations. That is the best I can offer. I'm sure the Noble Lord of Faulkner of Thoroton can give me a long lecture on all of those Law Commission studies which have never ended up in law and the length of time being taken. But this is another good reason why we should not, I think, proceed in haste on this. My Lords, I was about to move on to the second aspect of reservation I have with Amendment 219, which is whether, if the hate crimes are extended to sex, they should also include gender. Amendment 219 includes the formulation sex or gender, and that was indeed the Law Commission's provisional view, but its conclusion was rather more tentative than some of the other conclusions that it made in that consultation document. And I think this is an area where their final views will be particularly important. In their very large consultation document on hate crime, they didn't spend very much time on whether gender should be included as an addition to sex. And I suspect that there will be a fuller examination on the basis of the consultation responses which have come in to their consultation. And if I could just explain, sex is a concept which is easily defined. It's binary, it's based on biological reality, and it's recorded on everyone's birth certificate. And sex, as we have been debating, is a protected characteristic in equality legislation. Gender, on the other hand, is a social construct. It has no ready legal definition, and it is most definitely not a protected characteristic. While gender is sometimes used in legislation, it has in the past genuinely been as a synonym for sex. But I believe that the word gender is now increasingly problematic to be used in that way, because it is being used by those who claim that gender is different from and sometimes more important than sex, and that it is not binary. Some describe gender as a spectrum. Some say that there is a finite number of genders, but there is no consensus on how many genders, with claims in excess of 100 genders. Now, I can illustrate how difficult the use of gender is becoming from something I discovered called nominal gender, all one word. I'm going to quote this verbatim. Nominal gender means a gender where the person's gender is so much just them that no one else can experience it. Most nominal gender people will define their gender as a mashup between other genders of a certain kind, like bee gender or angel gender. But it is not a multiple gender, it is one. Who knew, my lords? Now, this new lexicon of gender is part of a gender identity theory. It's a controversial issue and has not hitherto found its way into legislation for very good reason. And I believe that legislating for hostility towards gender would make for very uncertain law. The use of the word gender has moved beyond, well beyond an attempt to achieve drafting neutrality and has started to acquire a very different meaning. Now, there has been some discussion earlier about where transgender fits in, and I don't believe that adding or gender is necessary to meet any needs of those in the transgender community. Hostility related to transgender is already included by the hate crime legislation. And if the term sex were added to section 66, hostility towards, say, a transgender woman would be automatically covered either because she's transgender or because she is presumed to be of female sex. So there's no need for the ambiguity of gender to be introduced into the definition of the hate crime because there were no people already excluded from that. And Lords, I have deliberately not addressed the substance of Amendment 219, which is whether or not there should be misogyny added to the list. I'm personally not convinced that the case has been made, but I did not table Amendment 219A in order to oppose the extension of hate crime to sex. Indeed, my amendment would allow a fast-track route to legislating for it if that were the outcome of the recommendation from the Law Commission. I believe that Parliament would be negligent if it rushed through a solution without waiting for the Law Commission to report on this difficult subject. Now, I know that many noble lords feel strongly about misogyny, as I do, as a woman, but I entreat noble lords not to legislate in haste.
Just ask the noble Baroness a question on her remarks. She said that sex was binary, male and female, as recorded on birth certificates. How does she account for people who have a gender recognition certificate who are able to change the sex on their birth certificate in those circumstances?
Gender Recognition Act. So in that particular case, the birth certificate is altered. And for many, though not for all purposes, that person is treated as a woman.
I rise to support Amendment 219 and to reinforce all the powerful arguments made by Baroness Noakes. I'm not a lawyer, but it does seem bizarre that sex and gender have been explicitly not recognised in existing hate crime legislation. Crimes motivated by hostility to disability, to transgender identity, to race, to religion, and to sexual orientation are all recognised, but not sex and gender. Yet in a report published in January of this year by UN Women UK, 71% of the 1,000 women polled had experienced sexual harassment in a public place, rising to a staggering 97% of women under 25. This is made worse by the sad fact that there's widespread scepticism among women and girls about reporting violence and abuse to the police because they've no confidence that their claims will be acted on or even taken seriously. Violence against women and girls doesn't occur in a vacuum, of course. Hostility towards women and girls creates a culture in which violence and abuse is tolerated and repeated. That culture has to be changed. So a reform to legislation which this amendment proposes, and which I hope the government will support, must be accompanied by a transformation of attitudes within the police. I believe there are encouraging signs that this is happening, albeit slowly. I was fortunate to attend a briefing, as has already been mentioned, on this amendment, given by former Chief Superintendent of Police for Nottinghamshire, Sue Fish, a pioneer of this approach, and Stuart Henderson, North Yorkshire Police Hate Crime Coordinator, who is actually currently delivering this policy. It was absolutely fascinating to learn how much a difference can be made when the leadership of a force is committed to driving a policy forward. A number of other forces are doing the same, and I commend this approach to the Metropolitan Police Force as it struggles to respond to the tsunami of criticism on gender-based hate crimes. Because not all police forces have signed up, there is no consistency of either reporting or approach to these crimes. That's why this amendment is necessary, to ensure every woman and girl right across the country can feel confident that the role of misogyny and what they experience on a daily basis will, at last, be taken seriously and dealt with appropriately. The amendment is also necessary because it will require police forces to record instances of motivation by hostility to the victim's sex or gender, enabling them to monitor much more effectively the incidence of these crimes and so address and prevent them. Evaluation of this approach in Nottinghamshire showed improved victim confidence to come forward and report crimes and benefits to the local police in their efforts to combat these crimes. It's a great tribute to Sue Fish that she persisted in pursuing the need for this change, and to Nottinghamshire Police for embracing it as pioneers. Finally, my Lords, I am aware that the Government has asked the Law Commission to look at this and is due to report imminently. I hope the Government won't use that as an excuse to kick this into the long grass. Even if the Law Committee reports soon, too many of its reports are ignored by Government and not implemented. I hope the Minister, in replying today, will acknowledge the urgency of this issue and commit to concrete measures as set out in the amendment to address it speedily.
Assure my noble friend Lord Russell of Liverpool that I do intend to be brief. I speak to Amendment 219A, to which my name is attached. Sadly, as Baroness Noakes has pointed out, violence against women and girls is still a major issue in this country. I don't think a week goes by without us reading or hearing about some terrible act. And a few years ago, I, like many others, would have conflated the words sex and gender. We discussed the gender pay gap, where actually we probably mean a sex pay gap. But it's become clear to me that as language evolves, sex and gender do mean very different things. Baroness Noakes, Noble Lady Baroness Noakes, has outlined this amendment very clearly, but I also believe that adding gender is unnecessary, as it could add further confusion to an area of law in which existing terminology is inconsistent and at times contested. Just in the short debate we've had tonight, we've seen there is plenty more to discuss on the definition. What I think we all agree on, protection of all people, is important. We should promote dignity, but that should be done without confusion. And I do believe that we should wait for the Law Commission report, which I hope will report soon, because it's a significant piece of work and it will help inform the debate further.
Time is against us, so I am going to be really, really brief. Two things I want to say is, my Lords, from all our debates so far, I am convinced that the issue of inconsistent policing is the one where I would put most of my money in terms of making improvement in the situation. And I think Her Majesty's Inspectorate, which looked at the way police forces dealt with violence to women and girls, was very persuasive about the hugely patchy approach of police forces. My Lords, as far as the Law Commission work is concerned, anyone reading it will see it's complex, and that the Law Commission did not come to an easy conclusion when it came to a original view that it would be helpful to change the or to add to the categories in the way suggested. And my Lords, it noted that in the way it dealt with, that most notably the risk that hate crime laws could prove unhelpful in certain contexts, such as domestic abuse and sexual offences. It then went on to quote from evidence from the Fawcett Society, who argued that all sexual and domestic abuse offences committed by men against women should be understood as inherently misogynistic. There is therefore a risk that sex-based hate crime might disrupt this understanding. This is because it would require juries to seek express evidence of misogyny in these contexts, potentially causing some offence to be non-misogynistic, where there is insufficient evidence of this. My Lords, I'm not qualified to comment on the detail of it. What is clear is that this is a complex issue, just as the issue around the issue of sex and gender is. And I really think, my Lords, given that they're going to report by the end of the year, the key thing I think we want to hear from the Noble Baroness, the Minister, is that the government are going to take it seriously. And this is not going to join other Law Commission reports into the long grass.
My Lords, I think we're all impatient for the Law Commission report, but I believe it is best to await that report before deciding how best to frame any law on hatred towards women. Sex and gender have become conflated in ordinary speech, even in legislation, but they are not the same. Not least because while sex has a clear meaning in law, as defined in the Equality Act, the term gender does not, and it is taken to mean social roles or stereotypes associated with someone's sex, but that is too tenuous, at least at this stage, to be a legal definition. If the intention of adding or gender is to ensure that legislation also covers hate crimes perpetrated towards trans women, it is unclear why the law would not catch a crime directed towards a trans woman on the basis of presumed sex. And in addition, crimes directed against someone based on their transgender identity are already covered by hate crimes legislation. Going back to the conflation and confusion of sex and gender, I would just like to quote from a statement by the Equalities and Human Rights Commission in 2018. They said, gender refers to socially constructed roles of women and men and or an individual's conception of their identity. The term is often used interchangeably with sex, partly in recognition that much of the inequality between women and men is driven by underlying social and power structures rather than by biological sex. Although the Equality Act protects people from discrimination because of their sex, other UK legislation, such as the regulations requiring employers to publish their gender pay gap, refers to gender. This may cause confusion in some circumstances. And the EHRC went on, to avoid any ambiguity, we are reviewing our use of language across our website and publications to ensure clarity and consistency. However, it is important to note that any mistaken or structural use of the term gender does not affect how the law works in practice. Now, I haven't had the chance to check through all the EHRC publications since 2018, but I think those were wise words. I do want hate crime legislation to be extended to misogyny. I very much hope that the Equalities and Human Rights Commission does continue its pursuit of clarity and consistency, and I was interested to hear the remarks of the Noble Lady Baroness Faulkner earlier. I cannot see that conflating sex and gender in this amendment goes in the right direction, and I think we should wait to hear what the Law Commission advises.
I'm of a mind to be opposed to the introduction of misogyny, hate crime, but I won't share my broader thoughts with you at this late hour. You'll be delighted to know. But I do think that there are problems that we need to be clear about before we can even have this conversation. Because what is our definition of misogyny here? We just assume, we talk about it as hatred of women. But I think it is not straightforward to legislate against hatred of women in 2021 when there's such a toxic debate about what our definition of a woman is. What is a woman? Who is and who isn't a woman? And we heard the very lively discussion earlier that we don't agree in this place necessarily. We know that somebody can simply declare themselves as a woman regardless of biological reality. We know that the debate about whether only women have cervixes has scuppered leading politicians who seem unsure about biology in that regard. And I don't say this to be glib or to, as in case the noble Baroness Chakrabarti thinks I'm trying to stir up trouble again, is because it's a genuine issue, it seems to me, that the conflation of sex and gender, and I know that the amendment doesn't do that, it separates it out, but I'm saying misogyny as hatred of women is not straightforward at the moment. I also want to know kind of which or what misogyny this is trying to address, because if you conflate, if you erase, for example, sex-based rights, which some feminists think that is going on at the moment, then is that a misogynistic outlook? Certainly some feminists argue it is. There's certainly a huge amount of visceral and vile hatred thrown at gender-critical women, meted out by some of the gender and trans extremists, not by trans people in general, I hasten to add. Those kind of people who drove Kathleen Stock, Professor Kathleen Stock, out of her job at Sussex University. They sounded misogynistic to me, but are they the target of this amendment? And so I'm just drawing attention to the fact that saying that you want a misogynistic hate crime, it doesn't clarify to me what it's trying to do. And I understand that what I've said is contentious, and not everybody here will agree with some of the points that I've made even so far. But therefore, in this context, is it appropriate to get the law, let alone the police on the ground, to try and untangle what is a very toxic discussion in society and to try and implement it? I don't know how that's going to help women by putting that on to the police. The other thing that I just wanted... Yes, of course.
Could she just perhaps accept that if she was to speak, I don't think we should both be standing.
Oh, sorry, I don't.
If she was to speak to some of the senior police officers, men and women, who have to deal with the victims of hostility and aggravated crimes, largely motivated by misogyny, and if you ask them what they think misogyny is, I think you would get a very, very clear response, because they, day to day, interact with people who are directly victims of it. So while I think it's very interesting to have a sort of moral maze-like discussion at a theoretical level, I do think that, just to be clear, what those of us who are proposing this amendment, including the noble and learned Lord Judge, want, is to do something now about the victims who are experiencing hostility based on misogyny. And I don't think we should be just talking in airy circles about this. We need to do something.
I will try and avoid airy circles, but actually only not long ago I was invited to speak to a gathering of police officers of various ranks on the issue of hate crimes, and I can safely say that it was a 50-50 split. So I don't think that you... And by the way, quite a number of the female officers there were supportive of me and my position, just as an aside. So it's not an airy-fairy moral maze position as it goes, although it does try and have some principle. I actually am about to go on and talk about, however, policing, because I understand that one of the reasons why there's a sense of urgency about making misogyny a hate crime is in response to the horrendous and high-profile treatment, murders, rapes of women, and of course, we're all mentioning Sarah Everard, but there's many more. But I wonder whether, in fact, framing that violence against women through hate will actually solve the problem that it says it's going to tackle. Because as far as I can see, we have laws against indecent exposure, stalking, voyeurism, sexual assault, domestic abuse, rape. They are criminal offences, largely serious criminal offences, and I don't understand why an additional law would act as a further deterrent or reassure women. I just don't get that. Because if, as some argue, and I agree with them, that women are having problem gaining justice in the courts at present for those very acts, why would hate crime as an aggravated offence make any difference if the crimes in question are not being policed, investigated or prosecuted satisfactorily in the first place? And when I read the literature on misogyny, on hate crimes, and this was stated, mentioned by the Noble Baroness Newlove, you know, the theory goes that minor incidents of gross sexist behaviour are misogynistic, that they will indisputably be part of a continuum that will lead to more serious crimes. But I worry that there's a danger there of relativising the horrors of rape and murder, but also tangling up the police in not as serious events and take their eye off the ball of what I think they need to be doing, which is to, of course, be policing the streets, protecting people, prosecuting and so on. So what I'm saying is I'm worried that this will be causing a distraction for the police from doing the very job that I think that they need to be doing. Just, you know, to use one example, because I've been involved in talking to people in the area of Rochdale and Rotherham about the organised networks of male grooming and the systematic abuse and rape of vulnerable young women in those areas, that was ignored largely by the authorities, downplayed and continues to be not discussed. That seems to me to be what we should be discussing here. Labelling it as misogynistic doesn't seem to me to help. I just want them to do the job of investigating when women are abused. That seems to me to be far more important.
My Lords, I rise very briefly, Lord Russell will be pleased to know, to offer the Green Group's support for the Noble Lady Baroness Newlove's Amendment 219. And I'm simply going to make 2 points, one of which very much draws on the recent intervention by the Noble Lord, Lord Russell. And that's about the origins, and the Noble Lady Baroness Newlove referred to this. Nottingham Police Force has been the pioneer in this area. But in my contribution on this subject to the Domestic Abuse Bill, I looked back beyond that. And if you look at the history of how Nottingham Police came to be doing that, it actually began with a group called Nottingham Citizens, a survey that they conducted among the people of Nottingham. And then that led to an event at the Nottingham Women's Centre. They held a conference, and that informed the police and informed the police action. So this is something that very much grew from the grassroots up, and in response to many of the contributions from people who've been advocating 219A instead, this has been proven to work. It's there demonstrably on the ground. The fact is there. And my second point, I'm going to refer to the author, Caroline Criado Perez, who many will know, and quote her: "There is enough data to know that men who kill women do not suddenly kill women. They work up to killing women. If only we were to listen to women and pay attention to the misogyny, aggression and violence that they deal with on a daily basis." Now that's what Amendment 219 is seeking to do. Now the Noble Lady Baroness Noakes suggests we have to wait and wait and wait. Well, I would suggest we've been waiting lifetimes. We've been waiting centuries for this action. We have a proven model. It's been shown to work. Let's put it into effect.
Well done.
My Lords, I want to congratulate the Noble Lady Baroness Newlove and her noble friend, Noble Lord Pollock, my noble friend, Lord Ponsonby of Shawbridge, and the Noble Lord Russell of Liverpool. And I want to focus on the amendment, not on a wide-ranging debate about everything that's wrong in relation to sex and gender or discourse in society, just on the amendment itself. Now, why I want to congratulate the Noble Lady is that it is a very simple and focused amendment. The word misogyny doesn't even appear in it. It's not thought crime. It's not even a speech offence. It follows a well-trodden path of adding protected characteristics or certain characteristics to a list of characteristics. Hostility towards people with these characteristics will be an aggravating factor in relation to a crime that already exists, that has already been proven or admitted beyond reasonable doubt in a court. And I say this to noble lords who are worried. I'll come back to their fears and try to assuage them. Now, it seems to me that it is totally unconscionable that we've had, for example, race and religion as aggravating factors in code for so long, and we haven't had hostility towards women. It's just totally unconscionable. And hence the waiting millennia, but certainly waiting decades since the code has added these factors. Now, some people may say we never needed to add aggravating factors at all. We could always trust the courts to get it right. But whether that's true or not, and I'm not sure it is true, we have a well-trodden system, and it is unconscionable, particularly at this moment when women and girls are feeling the way they are, that we should say we must wait because it's all very complex. If it's not complex in relation to race and religion and sexuality, my lords, it's not complicated in relation to sex. And these are people who've already committed a criminal offence. Why aggravate at all? Because if somebody gets drunk on a Friday night and gets into fights with people that they come across, that is bad enough. But if they go out after a few drinks on a Friday night to single out a particular group or a particular type of person based on, yes, their race, religion, or go around beating up women, that is an additional public policy problem. And that is why aggravation in relation to the group is a matter for this committee and for policy makers. Now, the point about, I want to address the noble Lady Baroness Noakes' concern about sex and gender. I understand that these are two different things. I've always understood sex and gender to be different things. I was brought up to believe that, sex is more biological and gender is more the construct. But this debate will rage on. But remember, this amendment is dealing with offences that have already taken place, and certain people have been targeted for these offences. So with respect, we're not talking about other areas of public service provision. We're talking about offences that may be violent, may be sexual, but they are offences that have taken place. Now, the noble lady, I don't know that the noble Lady Baroness Noakes' approach to, for example, people calling themselves non-binary. I don't need to know. I'm sure that she would agree that if people declared themselves to be that way and people beat them up for that reason, that would be a problem. Because we don't want to live in a society where certain people are singled out for example, violence. That should be an aggravating factor. Now, I'm minded to perhaps say, it should be possible to be open-ended about these things. We haven't got to that place. Now, maybe the Law Commission will in due course, but we are where we are today. And the fastest way to remedy this terrible injustice to women is to add sex and gender immediately, and then wait, I would suggest, for the Law Commission's report. Now, if the promoters of the Second Amendment 219A think no, because there may be other groups that need to be added and shouldn't be left out, well, then they can promote their amendment in addition to that. That tabled by the noble Lady Baroness Newlove, but they certainly can't suggest that it's an alternative, because sometimes the law does need to send a signal as well as work, in fact, and we cannot tolerate. While this bill is before us, we don't know when another bill will come our way. We don't know when the Law Commission will report. We don't know what the reception to that report will be, and we certainly don't know whether another bill will come our way. How can we possibly, in good conscience, leave a status quo where an assault aggravated by race is covered, and assault aggravated by the offender targeting a woman is not covered? I certainly can't find that in my heart or in my conscience.
Yes.
My Lords, I thank the Noble Lady Baroness Newlove for so ably and comprehensively introducing her amendment. We return to an issue we debated during the Domestic Abuse Bill, making misogyny a hate crime. From the front bench, we support Amendment 219 and we oppose the alternative Amendment 219A. When we debated the Domestic Abuse Bill, I talked then about the appalling kidnap and murder of Sarah Everard by a serving police officer. And as the Noble Lady Baroness Newlove has said, many more women have died as the result of male violence since then. And as the chair of the Police Federation of England and Wales said a few weeks ago, there is a problem with sexism and misogyny in the police service and in society as a whole. Urgent action is needed. Some changes will take a long time, such as changes to social attitudes and police culture. But some changes can happen now, and my Lords, we have an opportunity with this amendment to make one of those changes now. My Lords, I did not support the amendment to the Domestic Abuse Bill because I did not believe that that amendment made misogyny a hate crime. This amendment does. In the Domestic Abuse Bill debate, I suggested, as Amendment 219A does, that we should wait for the Law Commission report on hate crime laws. As the helpful briefing from the Office of Stella Creasy MP says, since 2010, more than half of Law Commission reviews have not been implemented at all, including the last review of hate crime legislation in 2014. I agree when the briefing says that this is an area where delay has tangible consequences. My Lords, the evidence that there is a problem is overwhelming. In the wake of the tragic and horrific murders of Sarah Everard and Sabina Nessa, there is an opportunity to strike while the iron is hot, while public opinion is behind us, where the issue is high in public consciousness, and we need to seize that opportunity with Amendment 219. My Lords, I did not support the amendment to the Domestic Abuse Bill because I believed it was the wrong bill, where 1/3 of domestic abuse victims are male. I believed it was the wrong bill because domestic abuse is one of the worst possible crimes, because if there is only one place where someone can feel safe, it should be in their own home. That domestic abuse could not and should not be treated as any more serious than it already is. My Lords, I also said this, and I quote, "If noble lords or members of the other place do not think we should wait for the Law Commission report, there is an imminent legislative opportunity to make sure hatred of women is treated in every way as a hate crime. We could work cross-party to amend the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Bill, being debated in the Commons as we speak, to make misogyny a hate crime in every sense of the term. Even if the noble Baroness is not convinced by the government concession, we do not need to rush this amendment through now when the ideal legislative opportunity is at our fingertips." Unquote. The ideal legislative opportunity is at our fingertips. It is here and it is now, and we should do it. I have to say I found the arguments in the briefing noble lords have been provided with less convincing on the issue of sex and gender. But I refer back again to what I said in the Domestic Abuse Bill. If the government only requires police forces to record crimes where the victim perceives it to have been motivated by hostility based on the victim's sex, it does not go far enough. Current hate crime offences are recorded where anyone perceives the offence to have been motivated by hatred, not just the victim. The amendment includes sex and gender. This is important. If an offender believes the victim is a woman and anyone perceives that the offence was motivated by hatred of women, it should be recorded as a crime motivated by hatred of women. It makes no difference whether the victim is a transgender woman or not. There may, of course, be circumstances where an attack on a transgender woman might be more appropriately recorded as a transphobic hate crime. But where the victim or a witness believes that they were, or the victim believes that they were attacked because they are a woman, because they perceive the offender believed the victim was a woman, then it should be recorded as such. The use of the term sex on its own may exclude such offences. That's what I said then. My Lords, it has been argued that legally such offences would not be excluded. But, my Lords, we need to consider the practical implications of excluding a gender, as Amendment 219A seeks to do. My Lords, there are some who believe that trans women are not women, that they are men. Some of those people are very strident in asserting that view, and I want to avoid that debate if possible. But the fact is, people are saying this, and that view may influence victims, witnesses, and police officers. Some people may not accurately report crimes motivated by misogyny if they believe misogyny does not apply to trans women. If we are to protect women, if we are to record all crimes motivated by misogyny, gender must be included. A proposal such as Amendment 219A, which makes life more dangerous for some women, makes life more dangerous for all women. From the front bench, we support Amendment 219 and oppose Amendment 219A.
My Lords, the Labour Party has been at the forefront of calls to make misogyny a hate crime. Former Nottingham Police and Crime Commissioner Paddy Tipping ensured misogyny was recorded as a hate crime in Nottingham. And we've heard from my noble friend Baroness Warwick about his work with Chief Constable Sue Fish in that regard. During the passage of the Domestic Abuse Act, we secured the piloting of the recording of misogyny as a hate crime in crimes of violence against the person, including stalking, harassment and sexual offences. Police forces recording misogyny as a hate crime is an important step forward, but we want to go further by including sex and gender in the list of protected characteristics in hate crime laws for the first time. My Lords, I'm only going to speak very briefly because of the hour, but I want to conclude by saying I thought that my noble friend Baroness Chakrabarti encapsulated the decision we have before us, and we in the Labour Party support Amendment 219 and oppose Amendment 219A. As my noble friend said, the offences, first of all, the offence has already taken place, and we already have the case where race and religion are aggravating factors, and they have been for many years. So we believe that misogyny should be added as an aggravating factor when sentencing.
Hear, hear.
My Lords, may I thank my noble friends Lady Newlove and Lady Noakes for tabling their amendments. Both of them have highlighted the importance of tackling violence against women and girls, as have other noble lords, and this is a priority that, of course, we rightly share. These amendments provide us with an opportunity to discuss the important issue of hate crime, but also to pay tribute to the work of the Law Commission. It performs an important service considering complex matters of law and making recommendations for change and simplification. This is very valuable and helps bring coherence to complicated and technical areas of law. The government shares the opinion that all hate crimes are a great injustice and should be dealt with by the full force of the law. I know that noble lords are aware of the breadth of activity to combat the scourge of hate crime, but in the interest of the hour, I don't think I've ever started my first group of amendments at 12:10 at night, so this is a first. But I shall consider the amendments that are before the committee. My Lords, as I've stated in the House before, in 2018, as part of updating of the government's hate crime action plan, we did ask the Law Commission to undertake a review of current hate crime legislation. This specifically included concluding a review of whether other protected characteristics, such as sex, gender and age, should be included. If I could quote from the review's terms of reference, review the existing range of protected characteristics in identifying gaps in the scope of the protection currently offered and making recommendations to promote a consistent approach. As noble lords have said, the Law Commission's final report is now imminent. It may be published as early as this month. And that, of course, is a matter for the Law Commission, which is fully independent of the government. Noble Lords accepted this during the course of the Domestic Abuse Bill, and I think that we should see it through in the way that we agreed. What I don't think we should do is commit to giving effect to all of the Law Commission's recommendations before anyone, including noble lords, has even seen and studied them. It would be inappropriate for any government to sign what is effectively a blank cheque. In particular, my lords, I know that people hope that the Law Commission will recommend, if I can use the popular parlance, that misogyny should be made a hate crime. To those people, and indeed to any noble lord, I would say wait and see. We don't know what they'll recommend, and nor should we at this stage. As an independent body which considers and weighs up the evidence, the Law Commission will come to its own conclusions, and we will only know what the Commission's advice is when the final report is published. As a noble Lord Hunt of King's Heath pointed out, where the Law Commission suggested it was minded to consider adding sex or gender to hate crime legislation, it only did so in a consultation, but a consultation's purpose is precisely to consult. The Law Commission will also want to consider what consultation responses said and shape its conclusions accordingly. Whatever the Commission's inclination might have been in 2020, we can't assume that the Commission's final position is until it has been published. I think it would be premature to accept Amendment 219 and negate the whole purpose of asking this distinguished independent organisation to give full and proper consideration to the whole construct, purpose and design of hate crime legislation. I would argue, what is the point in the Law Commission in the first place? I know people have been critical of it, but, my lords, I think it's a very useful tool to deal with certain complex issues. I also think it would be probably premature at this stage to accept Amendment 219A. As I've said, and my noble friend stated, we can't preempt what the Law Commission will recommend. What I think we can say is that the law is complex and contentious, and it's reflected in our debate tonight. It seems to me that there's every possibility that Law Commission will make recommendations which will require primary legislation to implement them. And I don't think it would be appropriate to make what could be quite significant changes to our statute book through secondary legislation. Dare I say it, were such a proposal ever to emanate from the government, I would expect noble lords to be critical. Yeah, you can take that down and quote it against me. Noble Lord Russell of Liverpool asked me about timelines and when the police were going to start recording the data. And as one noble lord said, we are currently in consultation with the MPCC and forces on how to take it forward. We will ask police forces on an experimental basis to record and identify any crimes of violence against the person, including stalking and harassment and sexual offences, where the victim perceives it to be motivated by a hostility based on their sex. We are in consultation with the MPCC and, as I said, on how to take it forward. My lords, in conclusion, significant changes to the law require a full parliamentary process with the proposals considered by both houses in the normal way with all of the requisite parliamentary stages. I do appreciate the desire for urgency. I'm sure noble lords looking at the clock do as well, but I don't think it should be on the grounds for changing legislation without full and proper parliamentary scrutiny. Accordingly, my lords, I can't advise your lordships to preempt the Law Commission's report or to act ahead of knowing what they will recommend. I would therefore invite my noble friend Lady Newlove to withdraw her amendment.
My lords, considering the time as well, I will try and keep it short. I won't do a second reading speech to end. This has been a really good debate. Again, I think the whole session this afternoon has been really interesting. I thank my noble friend, the Minister, for her response. And obviously, yes, the Law Commission does excellent work. And as she says, we'll have to wait and see. What saddens me is to say that we are so consulted out in parliamentary sessions and governments and everything else that the people on the ground who need that support system need the understanding and need the police service, the culture, everybody else to understand the hostility that they have. And I've met many victims, my lords, as former Victims Commissioner, and some sadly who have gone to report that they've been raped by their husband and said that you're not the only one tonight, love, has really resonated about why it's so important. But with the lateness of tonight, this was a probing amendment, and hopefully we may have something from the Law Commission that we can come back to at report stage. But for now, my lords, I withdraw this amendment.
Is it your Lordship's pleasure that this amendment be withdrawn? Amendment by leave withdrawn. Amendment 219A, Baroness Noakes, not moved? Not moved.
I beg to move the House to be resumed.
The question is that the House be resumed. As many as have that opinion say content. On the contrary, not content, the content's heaven.